My name's Ethan Caldwell. I'm 41. I run a small asphalt and grading company out in rural South Carolina. Nothing fancy. Couple trucks, a roller, and a shop that smells like diesel and hot tar year-round. And for 15 years I've been maintaining a little stretch of road most people in town have never heard of. It's not a highway. It's not even a county road. It's about half a mile of private pavement that connects a gated neighborhood called Willow Creek Estates to the state highway. 40-something luxury homes. Stone entry gates. Little fountains that look like they came straight out of a resort brochure. And every single one of those houses sits on land that used to be my grandfather's soybean farm. Now here's the part that matters. When the developer bought the property 20 years ago, he split the land into residential lots. But my granddad kept the roadway parcel. Didn't seem important back then. Just a skinny strip of asphalt cutting through the property. But the deed says something real specific. The homeowners get easement access, meaning they're allowed to drive on the road. That's it. They don't own it. They don't control it. And they sure as hell don't get to make decisions about it. That part belongs to me. For years the arrangement worked fine. I'd patch potholes, seal cracks every couple seasons, make sure rain runoff didn't chew up the edges, nothing dramatic. My truck would roll through early in the morning, smell of fresh tar hanging in the air, and the folks in Willow Creek would wave politely while backing their BMWs and Autis out of their spotless driveways. Different worlds, same road. Then about 6 months ago things started changing, more traffic, more speeding. People flying down that stretch like it was a drag strip. The worst spot was a sharp bend right near my house. Maybe 40 degrees, no streetlights, trees hanging over the edge. Kids from the neighborhood walk that curve after school. I've seen soccer balls roll into the road, bikes swerving across the lane. The kind of stuff that makes you slow down whether you want to or not. Except apparently the residents of Willow Creek didn't feel the same way. I'd hear engines scream through that turn every evening. Sports cars, electric cars, big SUVs. Didn't matter. They'd hit that curve way too fast and blast through like the laws of physics were optional. So I did what any road contractor would do. I installed speed bumps. 4 of them. Solid concrete. About 6 inches high, bright yellow paint with reflective tape, placed right before the curve so people had to slow down. Cost me about a weekend of work and a couple $100 in materials. Problem solved. Or at least that's what I thought. Because 3 days later, Tuesday morning, I step outside with my coffee and something looks off down the road. Where those bumps used to be, the pavement is flat. At first I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But when I walked down there, yeah, they were gone. Not chipped. Not cracked. Gone. All 4 of them had been sledgehammered to pieces. Chunks of concrete tossed into the ditch like construction trash. And sitting inside my mailbox was a letter. Nice, thick, cream-colored paper. Fancy little embossed logo at the top. The kind of stationery that costs more than my lunch. It read, Notice of Violation, Willow Creek Homeowners Association Aesthetic Standards. Apparently, the speed bumps were not approved by the HOA board. Therefore, they had been removed to preserve the neighborhood's visual design. And since the board had to hire someone to do the removal, they were billing me $900. Signed at the bottom in neat blue ink. Melissa Davenport, HOA president. Now I'll admit, I laughed when I read that. Not angry yet, just amused. Because whoever wrote that letter clearly didn't know the first thing about property law. But just to be safe, I called my lawyer anyway. A guy named Rick Harmon, old country attorney who's been handling land disputes around here since before I was born. I drove down to his office with the deed papers, dropped them on his desk, told him what happened. He looked over the documents, leaned back in his chair, and started chuckling. Not polite chuckling. Full belly laugh. Finally, he wipes his eyes and says, Ethan, son, you're in a very good position here. Because legally speaking, that road belongs to me. The HOA can drive on it, but they cannot alter it, remove structures from it, or enforce aesthetic rules on it. Those rights don't exist in the easement agreement. Meaning what they did, destroying those speed bumps, technically qualifies as property damage. Now Rick asked me if I wanted to pursue legal action. Sue the HOA, drag them into court, collect damages. But honestly, that sounded boring. Too slow. Too many paperwork headaches. And besides, I had a much simpler idea. Wednesday morning, I drove down to the rental yard and picked up a Bobcat skid steer for $320. Brought it back to the road, fired up the engine, and started scraping. If you've never seen asphalt get peeled up by a bucket blade, it's kind of beautiful. The blacktop curls away in long strips, like ribbons being pulled off a gift, and underneath is this deep red Carolina clay that hasn't seen sunlight in decades. By sunset, I'd stripped about 2 inches of pavement off the entire road. Didn't touch the gravel base. Didn't dig trenches. Just removed the asphalt surface that had been there since the subdivision was built 20 years earlier. Legally speaking, I wasn't destroying anything. I was simply modifying my own property. By the end of the day, the road looked less like a driveway and more like an old farm trail again. Then Thursday afternoon, it started raining. Not a little drizzle either. A full Carolina summer storm. And clay soil has this funny characteristic. Once it gets wet, it turns into something between peanut butter and ice skating rink. Within hours, tire tracks started carving deep grooves into the mud, cars sliding sideways through the curve. One poor guy in a white Mercedes sedan spun halfway around and sprayed brown sludge across both sides of his doors. I watched the whole thing from my porch, iced tea in hand, thinking to myself, well, if they didn't like the speed bumps, they're really not going to like this. Now, before we jump back into the mud, the tow trucks, and the HOA meltdown that was brewing down the street, let's pause for a second, because situations like this actually happen more often than people think, and there's a little bit of law and a little bit of human psychology hiding underneath the drama. First off, according to standard procedure in most U.S. subdivisions, a homeowners association only has authority over what's written inside the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, what people usually call the CC and AMP, RS. Those rules control things like lawn height, paint colors, mailbox styles, sometimes even what kind of fence you're allowed to install. But here's the important part. HOA authority usually stops exactly where property ownership stops. If a road is owned by the city, the county, or a private individual, the HOA doesn't automatically get power over it just because it runs through the neighborhood. Now, from a legal perspective, the term that matters here is easement. An easement means you're allowed to use something that belongs to someone else. Driveway easements, utility easements, access easements. But the owner still controls the property itself. Think of it like borrowing your neighbor's driveway to reach your garage. You can drive on it, sure, but you don't get to repave it, tear it up, or start installing decorations without asking. That's where things went sideways for the Willow Creek Board. Because HOAs sometimes fall into what I like to call the authority illusion. Once a board has power inside the neighborhood, approving roofs, landscaping, architectural changes, it starts to feel like they control everything. And that's where the psychology kicks in. This is actually a pretty common power dynamic in HOA conflicts. This is a psychological trap. When a group gets used to enforcing rules, they start assuming those rules apply everywhere, even in places where they legally don't. And when someone challenges that assumption, the instinct is to double down. Issue fines, send letters, assert control. But if the legal foundation underneath that authority isn't solid, that confidence can collapse pretty fast. And in this case, the board had just made one very expensive mistake. Because the moment they destroyed something sitting on private property, the situation stopped being an HOA dispute and started becoming a property rights problem. And trust me, in rural America, property rights are taken about as seriously as religion and college football. Now, with that little background out of the way, let's go back to the road. Because the rain had just started falling. So the rain hits Wednesday night, steady, heavy, the kind that turns dirt into soup in about an hour. And by Thursday morning, that nice, smooth half-mile of Willow Creek asphalt had officially become a red clay skating rink. Now, if you've never dealt with southern clay before, let me paint the picture. It looks solid from a distance, kind of firm, kind of dry. But the second a tire presses down, it turns slick and sticky at the same time. Wheels spin, the tread fills with mud, traction disappears, and suddenly that luxury German engineering everyone paid for doesn't mean much. Around 7:30 a.m., the morning commute started. First car down the road was a black Audi SUV, probably heading toward the highway like usual. They made it about 200 yards before the back tires started fishtailing. I could hear the engine revving from my porch, wheels spinning, mud spraying across the fenders. They made it through eventually, but it wasn't pretty. About 10 minutes later came a white Tesla Model Y, quiet as a whisper, creeping along like the driver knew something wasn't right. The tires hit one of the fresh ruts left by the Audi, and that thing just slid sideways, slow motion, until the passenger side dropped right into the ditch. No damage, just stuck. But Tesla drivers, they're not exactly known for carrying shovels. By noon, a tow truck showed up. $600 to drag that car out of the mud. Now here's where it started getting interesting, because Willow Creek only has one entrance road, mine, which means every single resident had to drive through that mud pit to get anywhere. Thursday afternoon, the Amazon van tried it, got halfway down the road, tires spinning, driver shaking his head, backed up and left. No packages that day. Friday morning, the school bus driver stopped at the entrance, walked a few steps down the road, looked at the ruts and standing water, and turned around. Kids stayed home. By the third day, the road had deep grooves carved into it, some of them almost 6 inches deep, and rainwater started pooling inside those tracks like little brown canals. Every car that drove through made it worse. The fancy white BMWs that used to glide through that gate spotless now looked like they'd been rally racing through a swamp. Mud splattered across doors. Wool wells packed solid. And the smell. Man, wet clay has this earthy, rusty smell that sticks to everything. I'd sit out on my porch in the afternoons with a glass of iced tea, watching the parade of luxury vehicles crawl past my house like wounded animals. Now, I wasn't gloating, not exactly. But I will admit something. There's a certain satisfaction in watching reality collide with entitlement. About a week into this situation, that's when Melissa Davenport finally showed up at my driveway. Now, Melissa was the HOA president, mid-50s, perfectly styled hair, always dressed like she was heading to a country club luncheon. That afternoon, she stepped out of a white Range Rover wearing a pair of designer rain boots that probably cost more than my work jacket. 3 other board members were with her. They walked up my gravel driveway looking irritated, tired, and more than a little muddy. Melissa didn't even bother with small talk. She stopped about 10 feet away and said, loud enough for the whole porch to hear, "Mr. Caldwell, this situation has gone far enough." I leaned back in my chair, took a sip of tea. "What situation would that be?" "The road," she said, pointing behind her. "You've made it unusable. Residents can't leave their homes. Deliveries have stopped. This is unacceptable." I shrugged. "Seems drivable to me. Cars are still getting through." Her jaw tightened. "You need to repair the pavement immediately, or the association will pursue legal action." That part made me smile a little, because I'd been waiting for that line. So I stood up, walked into the house, came back out with a single sheet of paper, and handed it to her. An invoice. Melissa scanned the page. Her expression changed real quick. Material costs for asphalt, $92,000. Road grading and base preparation. Compaction. Drainage repair. Then a 10-year maintenance agreement, paid up front. And a consulting fee for project supervision. Grand total sitting at the bottom of the page. $171,000. She looked back up at me like I'd just insulted her personally. "This is absurd." "Not really," I said. "That's about what half a mile of asphalt costs these days." One of the other board members stepped forward. "You expect the HOA to pay this?" I shook my head. "No, not exactly." Melissa crossed her arms. "Then what exactly are you proposing?" I pointed toward the road. "You buy the materials. You handle the labor. You fix the road yourselves." They stared at me, confused. So I explained. I'd supervise the job, make sure the asphalt temperature stayed right, check the thickness, show them how to rake and spread and operate the roller. But the board members, the people who decided my speed bumps were an aesthetic violation, would be the ones laying the pavement. And when the road passed inspection, then we'd talk about reopening it fully. The silence that followed was incredible. One of the guys actually laughed. "Are you serious?" "Completely." Melissa shook her head. "This is extortion." "Not really," I said. "You're welcome to use the road exactly how it is." Then I went back inside. Door closed. Conversation over. 2 weeks passed. And during those 2 weeks, the situation got worse. The rain kept coming. The ruts got deeper. Tow trucks started showing up almost daily. Then one afternoon, word spread through town about something that happened to Melissa's husband. Apparently, he tried walking down the road after parking near the entrance, slipped in the mud, and landed flat on his back, wearing a $2,000 suit. Ruined. About the same time, a couple real estate listings inside Willow Creek quietly disappeared from the market. Turns out buyers aren't excited about million-dollar homes that can't be reached without four-wheel drive. That's when the emergency HOA meeting happened. I didn't attend, but I heard plenty afterward. Lots of shouting, lots of blaming, and eventually, one very reluctant decision. The following Friday afternoon, my bank called. Wire transfer. Just under $100,000 cleared into my account for materials. Saturday morning, a convoy of trucks rolled up carrying 40 tons of hot asphalt. And right behind those trucks came Melissa Davenport and 6 members of the Willow Creek Board, wearing borrowed construction boots, standing there in the Carolina heat looking like they had absolutely no idea what they'd signed up for. I climbed onto the tailgate of my pickup truck, coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other, and said, "All right, folks, let's build a road." And for the next 11 hours, that HOA board learned exactly how much work goes into laying asphalt. They raked, they shoveled, they spread steaming black tar across the road while the temperature pushed past 90 degrees. Blisters formed on soft hands that probably hadn't held a shovel in 20 years. Khaki shorts turned black with sticky tar. And every so often I'd walk over, check a section, shake my head and say, "Too thin, you'll need to redo that part." And they did, because if the road didn't meet my specs, I wasn't approving it. By sunset, the final roller pass was done. Smooth pavement stretched the entire half-mile again. I walked the road slowly, inspecting every section like a foreman. And when I finished, I drove my truck to the curve near my house, pulled 6 new concrete molds off the trailer. Melissa watched me carefully. "Those better not be speed bumps." I smiled. "Oh, they are. 6 of them. Each one 8 inches high, 2 inches taller than the original ones. Bright yellow, reflective, and perfectly placed before the curve." The HOA contract we signed that morning included a little clause as well. 10-year maintenance agreement. Any changes to the road required my written approval, meaning those speed bumps weren't going anywhere. And this time, everybody in Willow Creek knew exactly why. Now, when people hear this story, the first reaction is usually laughter. The image of a group of HOA board members sweating in 90-degree heat spreading asphalt while a contractor sits on his tailgate drinking coffee. Yeah, I get it. It sounds like something straight out of a movie. But honestly, that's not the part that stuck with me. What stuck with me happened a few weeks later. The road had settled in nicely, smooth pavement, bright yellow bumps slowing traffic before the curve, and one evening I noticed something different. Kids riding bikes again. Parents walking dogs along the shoulder. Cars actually slowing down before that turn instead of blasting through like they own the place. And that's when the whole thing kind of clicked for me. Because the real issue was never the speed bumps. It was control. Homeowners associations exist for a reason. In theory, they keep neighborhoods organized, protect property values, make sure one person doesn't turn their front yard into a junkyard. On paper, that sounds reasonable. But in the real world, power has a funny way of stretching beyond its borders. And according to standard procedure, most HOA boards start with good intentions, volunteers, neighbors trying to keep the community running smoothly. Then something shifts. Rules start piling up. Authority expands. And before long, the board begins to feel less like a group of neighbors and more like a small local government. That's where the friction usually begins. Because from a legal perspective, property ownership in America is a very clear line. You can regulate what belongs to the community, but the moment you step onto land that legally belongs to someone else, the rules change. Fast. That's exactly what happened in Willow Creek. The HOA thought they were enforcing aesthetic standards. But the moment they smashed those speed bumps on land they didn't own, they crossed into a completely different legal territory. And once that line gets crossed, the situation stops being about neighborhood rules and starts being about property rights. Now there's another layer here that's a little more subtle. Remember earlier when I said this was a psychological trap? Because it really is. When a group of people holds authority long enough, approving house colors, landscaping, fences, it creates a sense of automatic legitimacy. The board begins to assume their decisions carry weight everywhere, even outside their jurisdiction. That confidence becomes self-reinforcing. Nobody questions it, until somebody finally does. And when that happens, the reaction is usually confrontation first, reflection later. In Willow Creek's case, it took muddy cars, tow trucks, canceled deliveries, and a ruined designer suit before the board realized something important. Their authority had limits. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Communities function best when boundaries are clear. Neighbors cooperate. Property rights are respected. Rules apply where they're supposed to apply and stop where they're supposed to stop. That balance is what keeps things peaceful. Now look, I didn't tear up that road because I hate HOAs. I did it because someone decided to damage property that wasn't theirs and then tried to bill me for it. That's the kind of situation where sometimes the fastest way to resolve the conflict isn't a courtroom. Sometimes the fastest way is letting reality do the teaching. And in this case, reality came in the form of red clay mud and 40 tons of asphalt. Now here's where I'm curious about something. Because HOA stories are everywhere these days, some of them reasonable, some of them absolutely ridiculous. So I want to ask you something. If you were in my position, and the HOA tore out those speed bumps on a road you legally owned, would you have gone to court? Or would you have done exactly what I did and let them experience the consequences the hard way? And if you live in an HOA community right now, have you ever seen a situation where the board pushed their authority a little too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read a lot of them, and honestly, some of the best neighborhood stories I've ever heard came from people sharing their own experiences down there. Because at the end of the day, this whole thing wasn't really about asphalt. It was about something a lot bigger, knowing where power starts and knowing exactly where it ends.